Hey guys, today we are going into part 2 for the Zorneo region and Pokemon Peak and Pokemon Abyss. And if you haven't checked out the first video yet, I'll link that down in the description, but this is going to be part 2. Now part 2, we're going to go into the gimmick of the region, the legendaries, the mythical. Now again, this region is created by EJ Monsters, who you can find on Instagram, and I'll link them down in the description for you to go and check them out. But we're going to go straight into our first Pokemon, which is a pure rubber type Pokemon. Now this is a new element that we have in the region. So this is Reboundillo, and it's looking a lot like a basketball, but obviously based on an armadillo as well, caught up in a ball. And there's even a few different forms as well. We have a tennis ball form and a soccer ball form, which I think looks very, very cool. Then next we have Camodile, which is a water and dark type Pokemon. Now this Pokemon doesn't evolve, but it does have two forms. So first is our nocturnal form, which this Pokemon is very awake for. I think this Pokemon looks a lot like a crocodile. I love the design in the eyes. It looks very focused, and even like the little hole that it has at the end of the snout is quite interesting. And then we have our daylight mode, and in the daylight this Pokemon kind of goes into a bit of a slumber and it's not as active. And now instead of going and hunt the Pokemon like it does in the nighttime mode, we can see its tongue is kind of like a bit of a fish bait. It's waiting for Pokemon to come into its mouth rather than going out and hunting. So it's definitely a bit more of a lazier form here. And in daylight mode it's become a water and rock type instead of the water and dark that we had. Then next we've got Zorneo Meowth, which is actually a pure fire type Pokemon now. I love the fire coming off like little horns on its head, and it's even got like a little stick which is on fire as well, like a little match. This is now based on the Borneo Bay Cat, which is that very bright orange color. I love the gemstone on the head as well, looks really cool. But this has a new evolution. Instead of evolving into Persian, evolves into Sniper. So you can see it's got a bow and arrow there, and that's because it's based on the Dayak tribal archer. It looks like even on that back arm it's got a couple of spikes. It's got a couple of spikes on the tail as well to use for more arrows. So really, really interesting design there, how it's got the flaming arrow. And then next we have Chiray, which is a pure water type Pokemon. This is based on a guppy. Just looks like a tiny little fish at the moment. Nothing too special, but it actually has a three-way split evolution. So if Chiray's attack stat is the highest, it evolves into Slatala, which is a water and steel type Pokemon. Now this combines the Chitala fish, which looks a lot like this in terms of the shaping, but it's also based on the Kerrang blade as well. So you can definitely see why this is the attacking kind of Pokemon. That blade looks very, very sharp. Next, if the Chiray's special attack is the highest, then it evolves into Arowana. So this is now based on the Asian Arowana, but also combines a crossbow as well. So it's a water and electric type Pokemon. You can see those lightning bolts coming off the side of the fish's head, and that's because it kind of makes like that crossbow kind of shaping. And then the last of the three-way split evolution is Combetta. So this is if its speed is the highest of the stats. This is now a water and fighting type Pokemon. It's based off the Siamese fighting fish. This is also inspired by Brass Knuckles as well. You can even see the fish as well. It's kind of like holding up its fists ready to fight. So I think those two coming together look really cool for inspirations. Then next is Kikawari, which is a fighting and flying type Pokemon. This is based on a cassowary, which is a very dangerous flightless bird. We can see those massive talons that the Kikawari has as well to match the cassowary. And this is also based on a Papuan tribal warrior. So we can see that a little bit in the coloring there, but we're going to see it in the evolution as well, which is Cassowar. So definitely getting a lot bigger now. Definitely matches the cassowary a lot, not so much like of the chick, but that coloring that's coming through definitely matches the warrior as well. So like the cassowary, it's got like a massive horn on the top of its head, and also looks like it's very angry and aggressive as well. Next we're going into the fossil Pokemon for the region, and I always love going through fossil Pokemon from Fakemon regions. Today we actually have 6 different fossils. First is Sedimine, which is a rock and psychic type Pokemon. Now this is based on sedimentary rocks within the caves of Celebes, which is in Sulawesi. So this almost looks like those stacks of rocks that people put together to balance, but it's also very psychic inspired as well. I'm kind of getting like Solosis vibes. I think it's because the rocks are kind of floating in bubbles there. Now this evolves into Sedimental, which definitely looks like a bit more of an awakened Pokemon. It's not so much of a slumbering Pokemon now, and we can see those rock bubbles have definitely formed a bit more jagged spikes on them, and looks like they can be used as weapons. So that is really, really cool. Then next is Candino, which is a rock and dragon type Pokemon now. Now this Pokemon looks like it's been completely sliced in half, and that's because it is based on the Kandi Bantar Temple. And the temple looks absolutely amazing. We can definitely see the inspiration here as well. But it's also based on a Carnotaurus, so it definitely looks like a dinosaur here. The Carnotaurus has little arms like this Pokemon does as well. The next one looks very cute. This is a rock and rubber type Pokemon. This is the Brachyhouse. Now this looks very rubbery. Obviously it's a rubber typing, and it's very bright and colorful as well. So this is based on a Brachiosaurus, obviously with that really long neck, but it's also based on a bouncy house, hence the coloring and the very rubbery look here. Now that evolves into Brachiosaur, which is now much, much bigger, and using that inspiration that we had before before with the bouncy castle. We can definitely see down the back and the tail. Kind of looks like a slide that you see on some bouncy houses, which looks very, very cool. Then next is Celeborn, which is a rock and fighting type Pokemon. Now, this is based on Celebocarus, which was a massive pig that used to exist in Indonesia and has now become extinct, but it had those massive tusks, as we can see in Celeborn here as well. Now, the design of the tusks are based on Tonkonen houses, which has that massive framework on it as well. Then next is Saurodome, which is based on an Ankylosaurus, as we can see in the tail there, but also the spikes on the top of it as well. But that shaping for the top kind of looks like a shell. That shaping is based on the Borobudur Temple. Of course, it is a rock and fire type. That makes sense for this design here. It evolves into Sanctuaris, so now it's become much bigger. But I think the main thing I noticed is that the flames have changed to a green color, which looks very, very nice. It's definitely looking very padded, very spiky in that tail as well, looking a lot spikier too. But actually has a third evolution now, which we don't really see with fossils. That's really cool. This is Ritualist. So now the flame color has changed again to be a reddy orangey kind of color. Before, it kind of looks almost like a tortoise kind of shape with a big shell. Now looking a lot more like the Ankylosaurus. That tail has become absolutely huge with that massive weapon on the end of it. Then next we have Opperspike, which is a rock and bug type Pokemon. Now this is based on the Opabenus, which was an arthropod that has become extinct now, which kind of has that same kind of shape, but it usually does have a big like snout or proboscis or something at the front, so we don't see that yet, but it does have big spikes on its tail. It evolves into Sharpebinia, so now, like we saw before, this Pokemon looks like it's become awakened. So the first one had its eyes closed, but now its eyes are open. Definitely looks a bit more aggressive as well. Those spikes on its head and on its tail are very, very long, but even like the little pincers at the front are looking kind of dangerous and spiky as well, which is really cool. And then again, we have a third evolution for our fossils. So this is now Mossbar. So now it's more so based on an ancient mosquito, like the mosquito caught in the amber that we saw at the start of Jurassic Park. This Pokemon has got a very big body and it's also developed some wings now as well. So quite different to the original inspiration we had. Next, I want to show you the gimmick for the region, and it is the Dagger of Sky and Earth. Now, Pokemon Peak and Pokemon Abyss use this dagger differently. So we can see on the right-hand side, Pokemon Peak has the euphoric mode and Pokemon Abyss has the enlightened mode. And we can see both of those are within the dagger. Now, the main part of the dagger is the euphoric and the enlightened core, because from this dagger, Pokemon becomes either euphoric or enlightened. Now, depending on the typing of the Pokemon depends on if it becomes euphoric or enlightened. So each Pokemon can only become one of these types. So looking at the starter Pokemon with these, we can see some are euphoric and some are enlightened. So it changes the design of the Pokemon, but also changes the secondary typing of that Pokemon as well. Now, this dagger also represents the 2 box art legendary Pokemon that I'm going to show you later on. So stay tuned for that, but let's look at the next Pokemon. Then next we're going into Dungsport, which has 4 different forms, and that's because the map of Zorneo is segmented into 4 different main areas. So we have a different Pokemon here for each of the 4 areas. Now, this is based on a dung beetle, but it's also based on 4 major sports within Indonesia. So first, our Eastern Dungsport is bug and fire type Pokemon. This is based on volleyball. Next is Sepak Takraw, which is an amazing sport. If you have not seen Sepak Takraw before, it's like volleyball, but with your feet. Next, we have our bowling style, which is now a bug and ground type Pokemon. And then lastly, we have our water polo style. So of course, bug and water type, and that is in the north. Then next, we have Karamgalin, which is a poison and steel type Pokemon. Now, this is based on a pangolin, which I think is very clear with the armor going down its body, but it's also got little karambit daggers in its arms as well, which looks really cool. And then evolves into Kujangalin. So now it's become a little bit bigger. It hasn't got those karambit style daggers on its hands anymore, but it does have massive claws, and even on its tail it looks like it's a really big scimitar. Then next we have Toxibox, which is a poison and water type Pokemon. Now this is based on the horned cowfish, which has those horns just like Toxibox has here as well, but this looks very bright and colorful. It looks kind of cute. And then that evolves into Toxaprowl, which is now a poison and dark type. Now we actually saw Toxaprowl in the first video when we were introduced to Faux Angler, which is a parasitic Pokemon that attaches to different kinds of Pokemon, and actually attached to Toxaprowl when we first saw it. Its pre-evolution before it didn't look very aggressive, looked very timid and happy, but this looks very, very aggressive. And that's because it's more so based on the frogfish now. And I absolutely love the coloring of this next Pokemon. We have Chirpray, which is a flying and psychic type Pokemon. Now this is based on the rhinoceros hornbill. We can definitely see that in the shaping there. But what is really interesting is that those extra horns on its head and on its tail definitely look like crescent moons with the shaping and the coloring as well. But that purpley, pinky kind of night sky look throughout the whole body of this Pokemon really works very, very nicely. It evolves into Hornbliss, which really just makes that coloring even better. I love the bright aqua kind of colors on the tips of the wings. The massive crescent moon on its beak and on the tail fit this Pokemon perfectly as well. I love this design. Then next we have Gibsong, which is a rubber and normal type Pokemon. Now this is based on the Sea Main Gibbon, which I absolutely love because it's kind of got that kind of hairstyle. It's also based on an opera scene, which I think fits that hairstyle very, very well to have those two elements coming together for our Gibsong here. And then next we have Winteroo, which is a rubber and ice type Pokemon. Now this is based on the Goodfellows tree kangaroo, but also combined with the ski jumper as well, which we can definitely see in the stance there, looking like a ski jumper. And it's even got like skis made out of icicles on its feet and on its tail, which I think looks really cool, but does look very happy. Now I'm going to go through 3 different Zornean Pokemon, but all of them are very, very important because you actually use them together to summon the mythical Pokemon of the region. So I'll get to that very, very soon. But first we have Zornean Dusker, which is a fire and ghost type Pokemon. Now this is based on Banaspati, the flame spirit, but I think having a giant flame for Duskull just works perfectly. I love the look of this Pokemon. It evolves into Zornean Dusclops, so still following that same kind of design, but obviously getting much bigger now. It's even got those hands as well coming out, kind of looking like bones or like a skeleton. But then it has a new evolution in Duskferno, much bigger now. We can see the skeleton's got like a rib cage and spine and everything as well. But what I absolutely love is it's got a sword and a shield as well. The sword almost looks like a Duskull. It's got a Duskull skull in there. There's a Duskull skull on the shield as well, but obviously the skull over the face is very spiky and looking very different as well. The next is Zornean Impotent, which is a ground and ghost type Pokemon. This is based on the Gendaruro demon. We're going to see as this evolves, it becomes very creepy as well. Evolving into Zornean Morgrem. So now it's a very fluffy, hairy kind of look. I love how the hair is covering those bright yellow eyes, but the hair is looking very matted and very dirty as well. And then lastly has a new evolution in Grim Menace. So we can definitely see the demon look that I showed you earlier in this as well. The massive tusks and teeth that it's got, the really bushy, hairy kind of look all over the head and the back and the shoulders there as well. But what I love, because it is a ground type as well, those arms almost look like they're dripping sand, or there's sand coming off it as well. And then the third of these Pokemon that we need for the mythical is Zornean Hatena. This is an ice and ghost type now. Now this is based on the Kuntalanak Ghost, which is a ghost of a grieving mother who is grieving for her lost child, which is very similar to something that we saw in the Mexican region that I've covered before. It's a different ghost, but the theme of it is still pretty much exactly the same, which I think is very interesting. The Hatena evolves into Zornean Hatchram, which now that we can see its eyes, I love that it's kind of like an icy blue kind of eye. We can see big ice shard on the top of its hat as well, but we can see that black hair is covering a lot of the Pokemon, but is also very large. It's sort of behind the Pokemon as well. And then again, like we saw before, we've got a new third evolution in Hatiri. So you can see that long black hair going all the way down the body and down to the floor. But because of the sad story of the inspiration for this Pokemon, it looks like it's got some icy tears. And it's got like an icy spike through the chest of this Pokemon as well. Now, using aspects of all 3 of those Pokemon, we can see that we can create a new mask, which we can use to summon the mythical Pokemon. And our mythical Pokemon is Reinecro, which is a dark and ghost type Pokemon. Combining all those elements makes this Pokemon. I feel it has a good inspiration from all of those other ones. It's got like the massive tusks, it's got the long hair, and it's even got like the little gems on the top and the bottom as well to sort of get that fiery look that we might have seen from the Duskull one. Now this is based on Rangda, who is an evil queen believed to be from Bali. Now, this Pokemon actually has 2 forms. Now, this was our first one, but it also has a demon form. Now, the demon form definitely looks very evil, very purpley now with those massive spectral claws. And this whole design, I think, looks absolutely amazing. I love the whole storyline to it, and I love the design of this Pokemon. Now, normally I'd show the mythical at the end of the Pokemon, but I wanted to show it here because it made sense with all of the Pokemon that we needed for it. But we're going to next go into the pseudo-legendary Pokemon and the legendary Pokemon for the region. And also, just a reminder, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying these Fakemon videos. Now, there are 3 pseudo-legendaries for the Zorneo region, and first is Barrowkit, which is a ghost and electric type Pokemon. Now, this is based on the Clouded Leopard, and I absolutely love the coloring here. And we can see it's kind of got like a headdress design as well over their head, which definitely matches the pattern of the rest of the Pokemon throughout the body as well. And we can see that this is exclusive to Pokemon Abyss. One of the other ones is going to be exclusive to Pokemon Peak, and then one can be found in both games. Barrowkid evolves into Barreleo, and you can see like the body is kind of disappearing now. We can see it starts kind of purpley at the front, but as it goes towards the back legs and the tail, it's definitely kind of becoming a bit more spiritual and disappearing. Definitely we can see that in the ghost type, but I love that the fangs are getting a bit bigger now as well. I think that golden headdress really stands out as the Pokemon looks like it's disappearing. And then lastly evolves into Leo Barong, which is that full clouded leopard-like design. It almost looks like it's wearing a spectral kind of fur over the body of this Pokemon, because we can see under that fur looks a little bit darker, but it's also got yellow spikes throughout the whole back and tail as well now. Now, the Pokemon Peak exclusive pseudo legendary is Rio Kit with a steel and electric type Pokemon. Now, this is based on all the Indonesian tigers. So we've got the Javan, the Sumatran, and the Balinese tiger, but it's also based on Ryog as well, which is like that Indonesian dance. So we're going to see that as this Pokemon evolves. But I really love the coloring on this Pokemon. I think the pinks and the teals with like that silver look definitely works together really, really well. It evolves into Ryoga, so that kind of adolescent stage, which is getting a bit bigger now, but also looks kind of sharper. Like its eyebrows and the shoulder pads are very spiky, and even like the tail almost looks like kind of the end of a spear. And then lastly is Tigreog, and I love that the tiger Pokemon stayed quadrupedal. I think that's very good. But we can see the spikes on it have become much larger now. Spikes on the head, but also on the tail as well. And then our pseudo legendary that you can find in both games is called Stringworm, and this is a dragon and rubber type Pokemon, which is a very interesting combination. Now this is based on a gecko. It just looks very, very small at the moment. It almost kind of looks like a tadpole, to be honest. And then it evolves into Stecco, which is now based on the Tokay gecko. Definitely looking a little more like a lizard now, a bit more grown up and adult. We can see that tongue sticking out like the gecko as well, but that tail is really, really large. And we can definitely see where the tail was going now in its final evolution, which is called Slapagon. Now, this actually combines the Komodo dragon with one of those sticky hand toys. And we can see the tail of this Pokemon definitely looks like one of those sticky hands. Now, the Komodo dragon is a very deadly and dangerous animal, so this Pokemon does not look deadly or dangerous at all. I think personally I would have preferred if it went sort of that more deadly look for a Komodo dragon Pokemon, but this does have a very interesting vibe to it, so it's very cool. Now, we are going to go into the box art legendaries for Pokemon Peak and Pokemon Abyss. First is the Pokemon Peak legendary, which is called Cloudius. It's a fighting and flying type Pokemon. Now, this is known as the euphoric Pokemon and is the embodiment of indulgence and freedom. Remembering that the Gimmick had to do with this as well, so that's why it's the euphoric Pokemon. Now, this Pokemon is based on the proboscis monkey, as you can see with that big nose that the proboscis monkey had, but also in Cloudius as well. And obviously elements of the clouds all over its body as well. You can see the legs, the head, almost like a bit of a mane coming off in the tail. Now, its kick has been known to split the sky in half, which sounds very cool. Now, the alternative is the Pokemon Abyss legendary Pokemon, and that is Abyssal, which is a fighting and psychic type Pokemon. Now, this is known as the Enlightened Pokemon, the embodiment of discipline and control. And it definitely does look a little bit more stoic compared to our previous legendary as well. Now, this is based on the orangutan, so a different primate to what we had before. Now, this Pokemon's palm strikes are imbued with psychic aura and can easily split a hole beneath the earth. So both of these Pokemon can do a lot of damage. Now, there's a lot more Pokemon you can see on the Instagram of EJ Monsters, which is linked in the description, so go check out the rest of the Zorneo region. Now, it's hard to choose favorites from the Zorneo region. I'm going to combine both videos here, but my favorites are Stormglide, Zornean Tauros, Hornbliss, and Rionecro, the mythical Pokemon. Let me know down in the comments what your favorites were. If you haven't seen the first video on the Zorneo region, check it out right here, and I'll see you in the next one.